Good evening. Welcome to PoliticIt podcast. Tonight we have Celeste Maloy, Congresswoman from CD2, Congressional District 2. So, we haven't talked since you were elected, but
No.
So what's that like? I mean, how did you like going into it? Because I know you were a staffer, and now all of a sudden you're the one with the name on the door.
Yeah, in fact, it was 1 year ago this week that we all found out that Congressman Stewart was resigning. So it really has been a wild year. It feels like it has to have been a lot longer than a year, but it hasn't. And getting sworn into Congress is an experience that most people never have. And I don't know what a normal swearing in is like because I won in a special election. So I got sworn in all by myself. Usually all the freshmen get sworn in together. And I got sworn in by a brand new speaker. So Speaker Johnson was only a few weeks old when I got there. And the actual swearing in itself was one of those rare, perfect moments in life. I got to have a lot of friends and family there up in the gallery. And it was like something off of a Disney movie. It just was kind of perfect. I got 1 to 2 minutes to speak, and I gave a short little speech, and they all applauded, and I got sworn in, and it was the best day I've had in Congress yet. And then it was about 4 weeks later that I had to file to run again. So I got sworn in right after Thanksgiving. And then I kind of had the holidays to unwind a little bit, to rest up a little bit. And then the first week in January, I filed to run again. So I've been in office for 6 months. I've been running for 5 of those months.
Wow.
And setting up a new office and hiring staff and training everybody and learning the job. So it's been a whirlwind.
So did you keep some of the people that were working with you before, or did
I don't get to keep anybody. So the way it works in Congress is each office is its own entity. There's no HR. Nobody works for the House, really. They work for the member. So when Chris Stewart left the office, anyone who was still there went to work for the clerk of the House until Election Day. And on Election Day, the office folds up. It's gone. It's done. Everybody's jobs are over. And then the new member, me, has to come in and hire everybody new. So there are a couple of people who had worked for Chris Stewart that I hired, but there was nobody that was still there.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it was like start fresh.
Yeah.
So that had to be a lot of pressure right there. And then in the back of your mind, you're thinking, oh, I got to go talk to people again about running.
Well, and legally, you can't hire anyone or have any hiring conversations until Election Day. And that's kind of a hot topic right now in Utah politics. Everybody's talking about that with all of the primary races going on. But for ethical reasons, you can't talk to anybody about jobs until you actually win an election. And so most people win in November, they get sworn in January, and they have a few weeks. I mean, it's through the holidays, but they have a few weeks to hire people and set up a staff. I won on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, and I got sworn in on the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. So I had a week to hire people, and there was a major holiday happening in the middle of that week. And so it was a lot of pressure to try to hire a chief. I hired a chief first, and then the chief hires everybody else. But there wasn't a lot of time to maneuver, a lot of time to get things clicked into place. You just have to jump in and start going.
So some of them did you bring to Washington, or were most of these people already there?
I didn't move anybody to Washington except the chief. So you just start trying to find people that fit the roles that you need, and obviously we had to start operating the office before we had anybody. And you would think the United States House of Representatives that hires thousands of people per year would be really good at onboarding. You'd think they'd have a system down, but as with everything Congress, they don't. And it was a really long process. Everything took more effort and more time than it should have and than you would expect. You'd have to go to this building to get a badge for somebody, and then 2 days later they'd have to go to another building to get paperwork for something. And so it just
So
takes
is
a lot
that
of
something
time.
the chief takes care of?
Yeah.
Once you've got that person in place?
Yeah. So as soon as I got sworn in, I had a congressional pin, and that pin gives me access to, the buildings and everything I need to do. But there's a paperwork process for everybody else to get a badge to get access. And so we had to go through that process for the chief, and then the chief had to help everybody else go through that process.
Yeah, I bet that was surreal. I remember the first day I was on the Senate floor after I was elected to the state Senate, and I remember looking up and thinking,
yeah,
this is really weird,
yeah.
right? It's surreal.
As a staffer, I never set foot on the House floor.
Oh.
And so the first time I stepped onto the floor was the night I got sworn in, and it did feel really strange to be down there. And then all of a sudden I was in front of a mic, and I was supposed to speak for a couple of minutes in front of all of the members of the House, and I hadn't really thought through how much pressure that was going to be. I mean, I had 200 people up in the gallery watching me, and then 434 people on the floor watching me, and suddenly I was a little self-conscious about what to say, but it went really well, and it was a really good experience.
So what were the first things you did legislatively once you were elected?
I got to work introducing bills because there were some things I already knew I wanted to do. There were things that I had already been working on. I said as a candidate last time, we needed someone who could hit the ground running, and I had already been there. I knew what priorities the people in the second district had, and so I immediately started working on reintroducing some of those bills I knew were important to people in the second district, and picking up the projects that were important to the second district and trying to make sure they were on track. A couple of examples, I reintroduced the True Cost Act, and it says, when Congress passes a bill, it has to say what the actual cost of implementing that bill is to each family in America. So when we talk about the total price tag on a bill, it's usually a big number that it's kind of hard to get your brain around.
Kind of the fiscal notes that we have written when we pass legislation in the state.
Yeah, and so this would say, this bill would cost every American family $3, or this would cost every American family $300. Those are numbers that people can understand easier and have more of a concept of what the impact of a bill really is. And the fun thing about that one is that just a couple of weeks ago, we found out that there's a similar bill that's going to get a vote on the floor, so they wrapped that bill into it.
Oh, okay. So you're now part of a bigger bill.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like a big package, but it's another bill that did the same thing. So they just put them together.
So what are your, on the campaign trail, of course, you talked about federal lands issues.
Yep.
So now, some people don't understand that since you came in the middle, you don't just drop into Congressman Stewart's committee assignments and everything else. That's a new process.
Yeah.
And I guess since it had already been started, it's they might move things around a little bit, but a lot of those things were set, right?
Yeah, you get assigned to whatever committees have openings, and there were a few openings when I got there, and the Speaker's office reached out and said, which committees do you want? I wanted to be on Natural Resources and Armed Services. Neither one of those committees had an opening when I got there. So I said, put me where you need me. You know what I want in the future. And they put me on Small Business and Transportation and Infrastructure. And I'm not on the Natural Resources Committee, but they treat me like I'm on the Natural Resources Committee. Yeah, Chairman Westerman's been great. They wave me on to hearings and they keep me looped in on what they're doing, because that's what my background's in. They know it's important in Utah, and so they just treat me like I'm part of the group.
Do you think that's because they already knew you from Congressman Stewart's office?
Yeah, and I know a lot of the staff. They've been really great. They've helped get my staff up to speed on the issues they're working on. People always ask me what was the biggest surprise about being a member of Congress versus being a staffer. And the biggest surprise for me is how willing my colleagues have been to go out of their way and make sure I know, how things are done or where to be, or, that there's always this dinner on fly-in days or whatever. You don't see that from the staff side. You don't see as much of the interaction between members. And I've been surprised at how satisfying that part of the job is.
Very good. Hey, we're going to take a break.
Okay.
We'll come back.
Hey, my name is Chris Stewart. It was such a great honor to represent you in Congress. And I think many of you know that I recently retired because of the health of my wife. She had a stroke, and we both knew that I just needed to be home with her more often. But many of you have expressed interest in her and have asked me, how is she doing? Thank you so much for caring, and it means a lot to both of us. So now the question isn't how can I best represent you? The question I have is who can best represent us? And the answer to me is just crystal clear. It's clearly Celeste. So in my life, I've been around some of the strongest leaders in the world. President Trump, military leaders, generals and NCOs, business leaders. And from that experience, I've been able to observe what is it that makes a good leader. For one, humility. And I think that's actually the strongest attribute a true leader needs to have. The humility to listen, to actually consider what it is that they want, to try to help people. That's Celeste to her core. Celeste does listen to us. The other is courage. Even in a few months Celeste has been in Congress, she's had to take some very difficult votes. It took courage to do that. But then she'll come home and tell us why she voted that way. And many times I think she did the right thing. That is leadership. Celeste has shown up for me. She'll show up for you. She shows up for you too.
Welcome back to PoliticIt. We've got Celeste Maloy with us, CD2. Congresswoman, how about that? How does that sound when you hear that?
It still sounds surreal.
Yeah, that's really cool. So let's talk about some of the issues that are coming up. I know I know you're getting beat up on FISA and the spending bill. Mm-hmm. Let's start with the spending bill. What do you see as the major issues there? And
Yeah. Well, spending bills are never popular. I mean, if you're going to run for Congress, you just have to acknowledge that the spending bill is always going to be a knockdown, drag out. We are in way too much debt as a nation, and we have to get that turned around and get it under control. We were never going to fix all of our debt problems in 1 year. It's just not going to happen. So what we have to do is start taking steps towards it. And the spending bills this year were cuts overall. And especially the part that's really important is that there's 12 appropriations bills. And I love when people get really upset that we pass them in two minibus, because you're a state legislator. How many appropriations bills does the state pass?
Well, what we end up doing is so we don't pass the whole bill. We basically just refund things that are already funded, unless we've decided though that's where we need to cut, right? So we do a base budget, and then we argue about the rest of it.
Yeah, but you do education and non-education, right?
No, we do education, transportation. So we have separate ones.
Okay.
Right.
So there's 12 at the federal level, and there's nothing magical about that number. That's just how Congress grouped the different spending priorities together by category. And this year, those 12 bills ended up being in two minibuses. And of those 12 bills, though, 10 of them were cuts. The only two that increased were defense and homeland security. And the defense bill, we cut a lot of frivolous things out of the defense bill, but we increased the overall defense budget. And the reason that's so important is since the early Obama administration, there's been this parity between defense and non-defense spending. So anytime we increased our defense spending, which we need to do, China's ahead of us on military tech, and we live in a really dangerous world right now, and we've got to prioritize our military spending. But anytime we increased defense spending, we had to increase non-defense spending by the same amount. We finally broke that parity this year. And doing that in a closely divided House with a Democrat Senate and a Democrat White House is actually pretty remarkable. So that's a big win that I feel like people don't talk about enough. And then we got a lot of important policy changes in all of those bills. When it came time to pass the bill, a lot of people were upset about the overall number. And the analogy I keep using is, it is a big number. I don't like that it was $1.2 trillion either, but it's sort of like buying a brand new truck and somebody saying, I can't believe you spent, $70,000 on a brand new truck. Well, that's what they cost now. That's kind of how our federal budget is. We've got to get it back under control, but just throwing the number out there doesn't tell the story. We cut back the overall number, and we really cut in 10 of the 12 appropriations bills. There were things in there I didn't like. And critics of the spending bills like to go in and pull things out of there and say,
why did you fund this?
Why did you fund this? Yeah. But really what we had is three options. When you reach the end of your funding, you can either pass a continuing resolution, You can pass a funding bill, or you can go into a shutdown. Continuing resolution was a non-starter for me. I've already voted against 2 of them. And one of the reasons is that we'd have been continuing the same budget numbers and priorities from the last Congress when Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker. So bad policies, bad spending. There's really no justification for continuing that now that we have a Republican House. A shutdown could be a win if we had a conference that would stand together and say we're not opening the government until we get these cuts or these wins. But we have a conference that won't even stand together on whether to bring a bill to the floor for a vote. And if we'd have gone into a shutdown in that kind of a scenario, we'd have had to negotiate to come out of a shutdown with a Democrat White House and a Democrat Senate from a really weak bargaining position. And what I think would have happened, and history is on my side on this one, whenever we have a government shutdown, we end it by passing a big omnibus spending bill. So faced with the choice of a continuing resolution, a spending bill that had cuts and important conservative priorities in it, or a shutdown that would result in an omni that was not negotiated from a position of strength, I felt like the only fiscally responsible thing I could do is vote for the spending bill. And the spending bill really does have, we defunded critical race theory in the military. We defunded a lot of the climate change things in the military. We got the Hyde Amendment in there that says no federal dollars can be spent on abortion. And that's one of the big things I hear a lot, is that this bill funded abortion. It can't fund abortion. The Hyde Amendment's in there. But there were some earmarks that went to organizations that do support abortion. I didn't like those. I would have rather take them out. But
so why were they left in there? What's behind the scenes that
they were Senate earmarks? So they got put in the negotiation between the 4 corners after, I didn't have any ability to negotiate at that point.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So what do you think the critics, okay, that are going after you? What are they saying? Why are they so adamant about you?
Well, I don't read or listen to everything my critics are saying, but I mean, I'm in a primary race, and this is politics. So anyone who's running against an incumbent is going to criticize what the incumbent does.
Of course.
And there's an incentive to do that, and there's a market for that. And there are a lot of reasons for voters to be grouchy right now. I don't even begrudge them that.
There's a big anti-incumbent feeling right now.
And there are good reasons for it. I mean, I'm only a 6-month incumbent, but the government is not functioning well. Congress isn't very functional. Republicans only have the House of Representatives. We don't have the Senate. We don't have the White House. So the House is the one place we have to show the American people that Republicans can govern, that they can trust us in this upcoming election to have control of the government. And we're spending a lot of time fighting with each other, and we're never going to be a monolithic party. I mean, it's just not how the Republican Party works. We're always going to have a wide variety of conservative views within our party. But what I wish we could get better at is having rigorous debate internally and then coming to a conclusion and then moving forward. But we never get out of the debate phase. So we have a rigorous debate internally, and then we go have that same rigorous debate externally, and then we burn each other down in public. And I just think would be better. I actually think the Utah legislature does this very well. We've got a supermajority in Utah. It's a very different situation. But internally, the legislature has these debates, and then you vote. And whoever's idea carries the day, people kind of get behind it. And we're not doing that very well right now at the federal level. We'll have a vote. The people whose idea didn't carry the day just keep having the same debate. And I think we'd be better off if we would accept an outcome at some point. I'm all for the debate. I think it gives us better ideas. I think we're better when we go back and forth about things. But we never get to a point where we say, okay, I wanted this, but the rest of the conference voted a different way, so we'll move on to the next thing.
So the other thing, let me ask you, we're getting short on time, but
okay.
I wanted to ask you about FISA because that's one that comes up a lot.
I'm glad you're asking about FISA because this is one that I have spent a lot of time on and I'm really passionate about, and there is so much bad information out there about FISA. So the first misconception that I usually have to deal with when I'm talking to people about FISA is that FISA isn't an enabling bill. It didn't create any new intel agencies or new authorities. FISA was passed in 78, I think, to limit what the intel agencies were doing. This is supposed to keep the intel agencies within their bounds. And it's for surveillance of foreigners outside the United States. And the Fourth Amendment does not apply to foreigners outside the United States. They don't have Fourth Amendment rights. The reason we keep talking about the Fourth Amendment when we talk about FISA is because with some of the subsequent amendments to FISA, they got sort of this mass surveillance authority. And when we're doing mass surveillance of foreigners outside the United States, the intel agencies collect incidental information about Americans sometimes. So if they're looking at a, Saudi national who's
communicating with someone in Salt Lake.
Yeah, then they're going to pick up some information about this person in Salt Lake. And all of that is sitting in a database. And the FBI was going and looking at that database, and they shouldn't have been able to. They didn't have the authority to do it. They were abusing their authority. So we all agreed that we needed to reform FISA to make sure that didn't happen. It ended up being split jurisdictionally between two committees, the Intel Committee and the Judiciary Committee. Those committees worked through how to reform FISA, and this is something that I've been up to speed on for years because Chris Stewart was part of that process. He was one of the first ones talking about the need to reform FISA. And the two committees agreed on 56 reforms, substantive reforms that help address this problem. But there were 6 points they disagreed on. And, we kept working with the chairman trying to get them to a place where we could have one bill. We didn't get there. So what we did is we went to the floor and voted on the 56 amendments that they agreed on, or the 56 things that were in the base bill that they agreed on, reforms. And then there were 6 amendments, 3 from Judiciary, 3 from Intel, that we voted on. And then that original bill plus the amendments that passed was the final bill. And a lot of people talk about the warrant requirement. I supported the warrant requirement, but the truth is you have to have a warrant to surveil Americans. That's the Fourth Amendment.
Right.
The warrant requirement tied in the House, which for an amendment means it fails. In the Senate, it only got, I think, 17 votes. It didn't even come close in the Senate. But I did support it, and I worked to get it in there. It didn't end up in there at the end of the day, and I voted yes on the final bill. A lot of my colleagues who voted the same way I did on amendments voted no on the final bill because they just really thought the warrant requirement was the linchpin. For me, the linchpin was actual penalties for FBI agents who abused their authority.
And those were in there.
And those were in there. So the example most people want to talk about when you talk about FISA is Carter Page and Crossfire Hurricane. Right. And I always remind people they had a warrant for Carter Page, but they lied to the judge to get the warrant, and they doctored emails to get the warrant. And so in my mind, you can have a perfect set of rules, but if you have no penalties, it doesn't matter. If they know they can violate the rules and get away with it, your rules don't matter. What I wanted to see is actual substantive penalties for people who are willing to cross these lines. And so what we got in there there's 56 reforms, but some of the most important ones is that 90% of the people who used to be able to go in and look at that database don't have access anymore. Only 10% of the people who used to be able to see it can still see it. It specifically says that they can't look in that database for evidence of a crime. Any query has to be tied to surveillance of a foreigner outside the United States. There's a 100% audit of all those queries by an outside entity. Those audits get reported to Congress.
And these are things that weren't in there. These are the reforms.
These are the reforms that were in that base bill. The FBI director's pay is tied to passing these audits. But the biggest thing for me is someone who violates these rules faces a $250,000 fine and a decade in prison. And that, to me, is the meat of the reforms. If you are an FBI agent who's thinking, I'm so sure I'm right about this, that I'm willing to bend the rules to get this person, and you're sure nobody's ever going to come after you, you might bend the rules. They clearly were. But if you're sitting there thinking, I really want to get this warrant, but I don't want to go to jail for 10 years just to get the warrant. That's a totally different calculation. And with the outside audits, the oversight from Congress, I felt like that those were reforms that were robust enough that I was willing to vote for the base bill. And it's only a 2-year extension. So in 2 years, we can look at it again.
When you have a bigger majority, right?
From your lips to God's ears.
Yeah. Very good. So we're out of time. So why don't
we're just getting warmed up.
Yeah, I know. Make a pitch to the voters.
I would love to make a pitch to the voters. A year ago was the first time I ever thought about running for Congress. It's been a crazy year. I've learned a lot. But I made a decision to run because I've seen Congress done well and I've seen it done really poorly. And I wanted to get in and do it well. I ran a clean race. I was a convention-only candidate. I put my trust in the delegates. I showed up and talked to people, told them I want smaller, more accountable government. I'm working every day on smaller, more accountable government. I've been in office for 6 months. I've done really good work in that time. I have worked to be the most transparent, the most available member of Congress anyone has ever seen. I am on the radio all the time. I do a lot of podcasts. I show up at events. I try to make sure my constituents know what I'm doing on their behalf all the time. 6 months in, I feel like I've demonstrated that I am indeed the kind of representative I said I would be. And now I'm looking forward to having a full term to do even more work, get even more reforms in place. I'm working on plans for permitting reform. I'm working on renewing the Downwinders Fund, the RICA Fund, things that are really important to Utahns. And I've made sure that I spend my time focusing on things that are important to Utahns and specifically Utahns in the Second District. So here I am running for re-election a short 6 months after I got sworn in. And I want to keep doing this work, keep making improvements, and come back here in 2 years and report again on all the things I've done for my constituents. I'm Celeste Maloy, and I would appreciate your vote.
Thank you. Celeste Maloy, candidate CD2. Thank
Thanks.
you.